We're gonna go ahead and get started. I think we have most everyone back in here. There's still a few people coming in, but I think we have a very interesting panel to start off this afternoon, and we have an excellent moderator. Our moderator is Bill Gerstenmaier, Associate Administrator for Spaceflight at NASA headquarters, and he's an individual that has been involved in spaceflight for many years in the control center as a controller, working in Russia for over a year, working in the control center there, and also managed the space station program and worked on the space shuttle program as well. So he has brings a wealth of experience to the position he's in Washington, and I think we're very fortunate to have him there, and we're very fortunate to have him as our moderator today. Bill?
All right, thank you, George. We have a very good panel here. I kept it kind of loose with them. In fact, I didn't even talk to them all about what they're supposed to present. So if they don't do well, it's their fault individually. If they do well, I will take credit for everything they've done, and it was my innovative style of not briefing them ahead of time on what they should talk about that allowed the success to occur. So all the pressure is on them. You can see the topics that we're going to talk about. It's really space station from 2011 to 2021, and then potentially beyond is the basic topic. I think each one of them will talk to you a little bit about what they see and what they envision for space station in that time frame. I think it'd also be good if they relate back from some of their experiences that they've had on space station or in their space activities, or on the engineering side where they've done development and project program management, or on the medical side where they've worked activities. So we'll let them go through. I'll start with just a couple quick thoughts, and then I'll ask each one of them to talk for probably about 7 minutes or so. Each person on the panel will just kind of go down the line and then over on the rows. Then that should leave us about a half hour at the end for some good questions, and this is really a good group to ask some excellent questions for. First of all, I would say that we have a very successful space mission going on orbit. STS-134 is doing extremely well. The spacewalk went very good today. We had a ppCO2 sensor, a carbon dioxide measurement device that went out on one of the spacesuits. And by our flight rules, we get conservative based on the metabolic rates, and we make sure we come in with the proper ppCO2 levels. So that made us take one big task away. We were going to go underneath the micrometeoroid debris shield. Once you pull that panel off and then you do the wiring and then put the panel back on, that's about an hour and a half, hour and 45-minute task. We just couldn't fit that in with the conservative guidelines we had, so we deferred that task. We did all the wiring on the outside. We'll pick the panel up probably on one of the other EVAs, probably the third or fourth EVA, and get ready to go move forward. The other thing that's kind of amazing about this mission is the 16 plus 2-day mission. What also is amazing to us is we have the power converter on board the shuttle, which takes the power from the space station solar arrays and converts it into power for the shuttle. So the fuel cells are essentially at idle, not generating or not using any cryogenic oxygen and hydrogen. We wanted to put a little extra oxygen on, so when we did the scrub, we didn't offload as much oxygen. When we may have got carried away, we have 4 days beyond the 16 days. So we could actually make this a 20-day mission plus 2 contingency days on the other side. So if we do that, we may have to rename the shuttles stations if they're there for 20 days or so, but that's pretty amazing. But it's going extremely well. We have a little bit of damage on the bottom side of the shuttle. This was an older tank. The external tank we flew was a tank that was in New Orleans when Katrina hit. A large piece of concrete came off the ceiling, hit this tank. We were able to repair it, fix it, but we didn't make all the modifications on this tank that we've been making in the other tanks. We are flying with aluminum bracketry on the outside instead of titanium. Titanium's carries less heat, and so then there's less ice formation along that bracketry because the titanium is a poorer conductor of the energy or the heat. So we had some ice formation, and I think the damage that we see underneath are some little ice pieces that came off on the tank. We may do a focused inspection tomorrow to take a look at the one area, but there were 7 little areas that were dinged. It's not a big deal to us. It's about what we saw on STS-118. We'll probably clear that, but we may get the digital data where we can actually get a digital map of the exact size of the ding underneath, and then actually we can machine it in a real tile and then actually take it in the ArcJet and actually simulate entry of the exact defect that's on orbit. So it's a pretty amazing system when you think about it. We can actually get the exact point by point image on that, just like a surface map, and then actually machine it in a good tile and then actually go run it in the chamber if we need to. So there should be no problem with that. So again, the mission is going extremely well. The other thing that's up there is the AMS there, which is a pretty interesting experiment. It's looking at cosmic rays. I got to watch it today as cosmic rays were zipping through it. They're getting excellent data from it. It's pretty neat to see the particles actually go through the detector, and there's about 7 different detectors of different devices in there that measure the particles. One of its purposes is to look back in time, to look back for antimatter. If there was a Big Bang, there should have been antimatter generated with that Big Bang. So a piece of this device is to go back and try to get a secondary confirmation that there was a Big Bang back at the beginning. So that's a pretty exciting device that's on orbit. The other thing today was we're going to undock the Soyuz in the middle of the shuttle mission, which is a new thing for us. That'll occur on Monday. We're going to back the Soyuz away 200 meters, and then the Soyuz stays there, and then we're going to maneuver the station underneath the Soyuz, and we'll take pictures of the station. So instead of a fly around, it's a back out park, and we'll move the station underneath the Soyuz, and then the Soyuz will do its normal reentry and then land down on the ground. So that's been worked. It was amazing today because it turns out we were going to do the original maneuver of the space station with the automated transfer vehicles engines. That's the European cargo ship that's docked to the back of the station. So I'm sitting in a meeting, and here's the flight controllers in Toulouse talking about how they're building the control algorithms for the ATV. Here's the Russian flight controllers telling us how they're going to actually go fly the Soyuz. And here's the mission control team in Houston talking about how they're going to do the overall coordination of this entire ballet we just described. And to see those teams operating the way they were, it was absolutely seamless. The controllers or flight directors are asking the questions at exactly the right time. It could have been an American team that had worked together for 15 years operating as a seamless team in this whole aspect. And then we finally decided through the whole process we were not going to use the ATV to do this maneuver. We'll actually use the service module thrusters. And the Russians were able to change in real time to make that change from the ATV to the service module, and they agreed to the plan, and they'll work the details for Monday. But the thing that's really encouraging to me is we're seeing international cooperation, and it's not really cooperation. It's actually international involvement on this huge technical demonstration at the lowest engineering level, which is a huge positive sign. So from that, I think, we're moving clearly into an age where we need to look to the future. The shuttle's retiring. This is the last set of spacewalks we'll do based on the shuttle. All the spacewalks now, there'll be one more spacewalk done on the next shuttle flight, but it will be done by the station crew out of the station side. And so we're going to see us going away from spacewalks that are shuttle-based. We're not going to carry all the cargo up on shuttle. We're going to have to rely on new commercial vehicles. So you're seeing a big shift from the assembly phase to the operations phase. And then we can talk here a lot about what we ought to be doing in the research and science phase. So with that, I won't say any more, and I'll turn it over to the panel and let each one of them talk a little bit, and then we'll answer your questions if you have any as we go through and think about the things that we're talking about. So, Leroy?
Okay. Thanks, Bill. Well, let's see. When we left off of the last panel, we were finishing up, the shuttle part of things, and at that point in my career, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do when Charlie Precourt, the chief astronaut at the time, asked me if I would be if I would go and fly a station mission, and it was not something I said yes to right away. There's a lot to consider. Not only would I have to be become pretty much fluent in Russian, in the Russian language, I would have to spend basically half my life over there, 1 month at a time, over the course of the next 3.5 years at least of training. And by the way, since we were all federal employees under the rules of the time, most of that travel was in economy class, so that had to be factored in. But You know, but it was, I kind of knew I would say yes, and I did, of course, and it turned out to be the most rewarding flight of my career. Not the part that surprised me, well, two things. First of all, nothing motivates you more to do something than you got to do it, and that was learning the Russian language. That was the hardest thing I've done since I was at the university studying engineering, but it was also one of the most rewarding. Another very great aspect of my experience was the cultural experience of being immersed in another culture. I felt almost, well, I did. I felt like I had two lives. Now, I didn't have two wives or two girlfriends, but I would really adapt to the culture as soon as I land. That's right, not as far as they knew, but as soon as I land in Moscow, you know, I would start thinking like a Russian. You know, I'd collect small bills and I'd start, you know, doing other things. And I'd start acting a little bit differently. And then when I came back to Houston, I had to remember to shift back to that kind of behavior. But Expedition 10, I flew with Saljan Sharipov, who's here today, and the two of us have formed a lifelong bond, and we had such a great experience. He's like the brother I never had, but it was such a great thing. And you know, I was on the Augustine Committee 2 years ago, as I had mentioned before, and one of the biggest findings we published in our report that we identified was the international framework that came out of the space station program and how successful it was. And really, what we thought is that this framework should be expanded, and look how well it has worked so far. Former Cold War enemies coming together to make the most amazing engineering structure ever envisioned, ever constructed in orbit. And I mean, the construction, I think, has surprised all of us how smoothly it's gone and how well it's worked. So looking ahead, you know, I would say that this partnership should be expanded, and it's going to be controversial for me to say this, but I'm a firm believer in engaging China as a partner, either in ISS and or in future explorations. And why shouldn't the United States maintain the leadership in exploration in a coalition of countries to do exploration? And what a great model we have in the International Space Station. One point that, or one criticism I frequently hear from people is, well, what have we gotten out of all this money that we put into a space station? And yeah, it's supposed to be this science laboratory. What discoveries have you guys made? What big thing can you point to? And the fact is, and you all know, that there are a number of scientific discoveries and advances that have been made on the space station and other space science research. But, you know, the thing I point out to them that they haven't thought about is, well, think of what has come out of it in terms of what we're learning about just living and operating in space. You know, that's not, we can't go to Mars, we can't go farther out without learning, and what better place to learn than in low Earth orbit. Also, we're learning a lot about vehicle design. How do we design a more robust spacecraft? We are learning so much on ISS on how to build something that's, you know, anticipating what its failure is going to be, how to make sure that we know how to build things and anticipate failures better, because when we start talking about sending a spacecraft, a human crewed spacecraft to Mars, we're not going to have the luxury of flying up spare parts because we didn't think that this part was going to fail. So everything's got to be tested out. You know, one more thing that I want to talk about ISS is, you know, it was relatively small when I was there. We only had the P6 array to generate electricity in addition to the Russian arrays, and now, I mean, it's more than twice as big as when I was there just 5 years ago. And so it's hard for me to imagine what that's like. It felt pretty big at the time, but there were only two of us, and now there's a crew of 6 on board. We're just kicking off into the utilization phase, and you know, I'm excited that Space Station is going to fly till at least 2020 and possibly as long as 2028. And you know, that's where we're going to be reaping the benefits to go out and explore beyond low Earth orbit, because now this is the perfect test bed for new technologies. For, you know, people are talking about fuel depots, about new engine concepts, and where better to test it than the ISS? You know, you've got it's pretty close to home. You can bring up spare parts if you need them. Simulations, you know, we talk about how we're going to operate when we have these huge communication delays with a real crew in a remote area. Well, what better place than the ISS? So I think the future is bright for ISS. That's and I hope I wasn't negative this morning about being sad about the shuttle going away, but I'd say that the future is bright for the International Space Station. Thank you.
Thanks, Leroy. Dave?
Thank you, Bill. Leroy?
Oh, I don't need those yet.
You know, Leroy, there's that day you can't read, the time you can't read your speech without glasses, that day. This is the day. It's actually just started to happen. You know, Bill, I was thinking when you were speaking that perhaps the time that real cooperation is happening is when you don't notice you're doing it anymore. You're just working. making it work, and it does feel like we've gotten to that point. I'll kind of go back. I guess you've all made me think. Many of you I've been working with for many years, 30 or so years, and 35. Is Dr. Poole still here? He may. I knocked on his door 35 years ago. I drove my car down and tried to get a job. He said no. And I've gotten an awful lot of no's over the years. And I came back a couple years later, and he said no. And I came back a couple years later with plans on how to build an ultrasound machine. And he said, let me see those. And he hired me. And we built that, and that was with you, John, Charles over there, and we got that thing running. And went off into some other projects in life sciences for some 7, 8 years. And one was the bioreactor, which I'll report to you, Dr. Pellis, is apparently went to the SSPCB day before yesterday and looks good for reinitiation of that project, which is a tissue engineering, tissue culture, living system for space station research, which I'll mention in just a moment. And ended up on SLS-2 in the astronaut office, and then on the cosmonaut school with Sally. We were classmates. Sally's on, you're here somewhere. My работали вместе в космический урок. And so it's been so broad. Flew on Mir, and the United States put a wonderful Perota module up on the Mir space station, and I felt like I was in a laboratory really doing the serendipity, time to look at the experiments, interact, and actually kind of not interact was important. We didn't have the communication, so you could have the peace to think and make some decisions on your own, then report what you did, and sometimes the wrong things you did led to the real discoveries. Serendipity was allowed to operate, and that's really important for laboratories. They're going to these discoveries have this nasty habit of being the wrong discovery on the wrong day and not the one you predicted that was supposed to happen, but the real important thing just gets spotted, and that's how the whole three-dimensional tissue engineering bioreactor thing happened. Completely unanticipated accident. In fact, it was looked at as a failure for the very benefit. That's its own story, though. And then we ended up building space stations. Well, the Russians built space stations for many years, as you mentioned, and the United States went down a space shuttle, moon and then space shuttle path. They turned out to be totally complementary and very powerful when operated together, and more than either one would have been, and the techniques were different, and they ended up powerful. Well, anyway, I'm going to kind of cut to the end that I see space benefits in 4 categories, really. The benefits you have to the Earth from space, things on the importance to the Earth environment, the passion of exploration, and then just plain old inspiration itself. And one way to look at this problem is envision the future. What is the future we want to have in space? And the details are all very hard, and as we muddle our way through or work, it's all very difficult day to day. And Star Trek took us ahead into a vision, and there's a time to do that. And I look forward, the vision I have, and I think many people do, is a day where our problem up on a space station is how to meet the delivery for the medicines that we're waiting for back on Earth. We're behind schedule on the freighter, and how the organs that are all being built, the patients are all scheduled for their surgeries, and we've got to meet that schedule, and that becomes our problem, how to get the pieces up back and forth, as opposed to right now we're figuring out how to do those technologies, but the vision is to change the problem into how to deliver the products fast enough to where they're needed. In the environment, we've built great sensors for environmental understanding human impact, rational countermeasures, and that's the level we're at. But we need to control the environment. We see the things going on the Earth that are devastating, as we see right now in the Midwest moving south. Well, our vision should be stop that from even happening and understand it to that degree. Exploration, radiation, of course, is key. Closed-loop systems are key. Autonomous systems that live off the resources of the local area, that's all the talk. That's the hard part. I mean, it's more than talk, it's what we're doing. But we have to reconcile a problem now between every spacecraft we've ever built is a very point design, a very specific design. Excuse me, I got braces a few days ago and it's not working real well. And it's a detailed point design. The program we're in now is a technology development program. And there's a place for both, but we are going to have to meet the day where technology development meets point design in order to get somewhere again. Inspiration, I look at LEO, low Earth orbit, as a place where there's factories, school kids win the prize and go up to orbit. That's part of their inspiration to do well. Company contests, the people go up there. This is all part of the commercial access. The scientists themselves can go up and make the serendipitous discoveries. It's very hard to get up in the morning, as many of us in this room have done. You're behind from the first minute. You go to the bathroom and get done, you're behind. And you've got to get the cultures going and the crystals going and all that. Well, it's hard to take your time and go, I see something that I don't understand there that wasn't supposed, and follow that up in the right way, which how real discoveries will be made. It's all about the pipeline. It's about the people. They're in here. We've been doing it for many years, inspiring each other, and so let's keep that vision alive and move it on into the future. That's all. Thank you.
Vanessa?
I would like to continue the topic of collaboration and cooperation, because ISS, I'm sure, was built for it. And so that's what we have to solve first of all, to make a good cooperation. And the second question, good cooperation for what? I'm quite sure that ISS was built to make cooperation for developing the best and the fastest approaches to exploratory flights. And actually, we are in much better condition than people were in '61 on both sides. We don't start from scratch. If we say that aviation, physiology and medicine was a mother of space physiology and medicine, that I would say that ISS more than mother for exploratory flight, because actually all the factors which we have in exploratory flight, almost all, I wouldn't talk about radiation now, this is special area, but all the other factors, all this extra duration of flight, actually it is the same. Actually the matter of duration is solved, that's for sure. If we have now possibility to fly people 6 months or 16 months with the same state of their health after that, it means it doesn't matter anymore. Then it could be 24 months and whatsoever. So duration, extra duration is solved. Now, a lot of technology developed for keeping people alive and well and on a nice degree of performance. We already have it. I don't think that we have to spend, we do have to work, because our brain is done this way that it works even when we don't want to make some, perfection and so on. But as a basis is already done. So what we have to do, we have to work on using our International Space Station, considering our International Space Station as a platform for developing all the necessary approaches, all the necessary conditions for going to exploratory flights. And we are doing this. From Russian side, what we are doing during spaceflight, we are trying to perfect the system of control, not to extend the monitoring system, but to make it more precise and more maybe even more economic, but more effective. On the other side, we are working very hard on developing many new things, units of countermeasure, which we consider as a passive countermeasure, because we think that there is one difference in long and extra long duration flight. That is that, to keep the countermeasure training every day on very high degree, what is necessary for extra long time, it is difficult. So it is very nice to know, it would be very nice to know for us that we can allow during this extra long duration flight, when people will not have chance to get back even if they want, so maybe to give them chance not to exercise for quite a long time, just using, as we say, passive means. So we develop these passive means, we test them, we see how do they work in exposition of different lengths during flight on ISS, how people come out of these intervals of not training, but using just passive exercises, and so on. And so we are working on it. Now, we understand that there will be no physician and no coach next to them during exploratory flight. So the accent should be somehow transferred to autonomic system, autonomic doctor, or at least, some, either in Russian I would say feldsher, and it means low degree, but the doctor who can diagnose his state and tell him what to do, the simplest things, and the same for coach, and the same for psychologist, and so on. And we are working on this system, and we are testing them, and we are developing tests for this system, and so on. I would not go further in it, but what I'm saying is that it would be, I think we will be much, much more effective if we will work together. Because, first of all, very simple logic. If I'm working only on my side, I have 3 subjects. If I'm working on the whole team, I have 6 subjects right away. The difference is not just doubling. It is very big difference. And, but we don't do it. I still just have my 3 people, and American people have just 3 people. Now, if we have not just, I liked what Michael today said during his talk on previous panel. He said, we don't have to have, man-to-man, working at the same station using the same facility. We have to have joint program. We have to make them. And I insist on, I know that you will have difficulty because you have this grant system which says if you got the best results on something which has nothing to do with preparation for long-term flight, you will win. But that's good. Maybe I don't insist on changing everything, but they should be. I'm just talking only from my side, that they should be done the joint program on developing of countermeasures, on perfectioning of control system. And we don't have to do it separately. And what happened now, that's why I told today so, I would say, harsh about our cooperation. Because, look, we now, right now, already have almost everything already joined, but not joined are, first of all, system of countermeasure and research. They are separate. Separate to such extent that we even don't exchange data. I would accept, and I was trying for years, that's why I have right to say it, and you know it, that what I was at least tried to do, I said, okay, your astronauts are doing this type of countermeasure, and our cosmonaut this type of countermeasure. But let us make the joint standard battery of tests after flight, for us to be able, after flight and during flight as well, some tests, to compare what this kind of countermeasure gave and what this type of countermeasure gave. No, we discussed this for more than 5 years already now, and we don't have the standard battery. It means our cosmonaut and astronaut exercise differently with different training system, with everything, and then we evaluate their state after flight differently. We cannot even compare this. So, and we can say, okay, maybe it suits both sides. No, it doesn't. But for future, it is out of question. For future flights, we have to know results. Right now, right today. But we don't. The same with the research. We suggest, and again, like we were doing research in interest of flight today and tomorrow, which was called countermeasure. It is just the battery of tests which is performed during flight, which allow us to evaluate, to assess the efficacy of training which this or that cosmonaut is using. Because they're very different, and so one preferred this, the other that. That's great that today we monitor what they're doing, so let us see what is the efficacy. So we are doing this experiment. It is called countermeasure. We suggested almost for 3 years. I gave up already. We started 5 years, maybe 6 years ago. Yeah, I'm finishing. Yeah, I just finished that thing that we suggested American partnership with us. They have the program of very close experiment, but up to now we are not allowed to work together. So they have the results on their cosmonaut, we have the results on our cosmonaut. For both of us, there is not enough subject in our, because of variability of training, and so on and so on. I think that it is not allowed anymore. We have to do something to overcome this, and at least for those questions in research which concern the safety, the promotion on countermeasure, to allow and even to promote collaboration. That's it. Thank you very much.
Mike?
Well, I just want to say that I'm really pleased to be here and honored to be here in this august group. I'm not really part of the medical community. I'm really part of the spacecraft builder community. I'm the deputy program manager for Boeing for Space Station. And I think maybe George invited me here in case there's any dissatisfaction with the space station. You guys will know who to throw stuff at. Actually, at lunch, Jeff was chewing on me about not enough hours for the crew. So it is something that we work very hard on. I think Mike L.A. earlier talked about how we can take and the different pieces of allocation of time. I think he talked about a third, assembly, housekeeping, utilization. Assembly's pretty much done. What we're really working on is trying to squeeze the housekeeping part down so that we can get more and more hours for utilization. So that is something that's very active right now. I sit in on the SSPCB, is the program control board, every week, and I can see the change. I'm seeing it happen. Dave was in there on Tuesday. He got money allocated for utilization. I'm seeing the shift in money happening as well, too, and that's part of it. I can tell you for our sustaining program we have at Boeing, we're on a downward slope. So we basically have a certain number of people now, and over the next 5 years it's compressing. And the whole idea behind that is to squeeze what it takes to do this kind of housekeeping and maintenance work, sustaining work, and to take that money and put it over on the utilization side. So I just want to assure you that there's very serious efforts happening on that front. I'm seeing it happen, and I'm feeling the squeeze. National Lab, I think, will be a big shift, too, as well. I think we'll see a lot of efforts on National Lab that will be very helpful. But what I really wanted to talk about today was really looking to the future and exploration. There's a big debate that's occurring now within the community about should ISS be a part of the exploration program or not. As you all probably know, previously ISS had kind of been set up as it's a commerce station. It's a place where we're going to go do research, and maybe you'll have companies in there. They'll be competing with each other, and maybe that's where some of this we can't share our data stuff comes from. But it really wasn't part of the exploration program, and so we need to decide going forward, is ISS going to be part of our exploration program or not? If so, how are we going to use it? Or are we going to run the program for this commerce piece, terminate the program, take the money, and put the money on exploration? Well, I would argue that we need to use it for exploration. I'm going to make 3 basic points, and I think the first point is fairly simple. ISS management model is really the first point. We can use the ISS management model that has been very successful for building ISS in the first place, but what it's really established, and I think Dave said it earlier, you know you're really doing collaboration when you don't even notice that you're doing it anymore. This is just the way we operate now, and really for the last decade I can tell you that we operate every single day as an international program at all levels of the program. And so I can't even imagine, although I couldn't have imagined it when we started that we were actually going to do it. We did. I can't even imagine now doing it a different way. So going forward, I can't imagine that we wouldn't have an exploration program that's international. I don't think that's really that controversial anymore. I think that most people buy into that at this point. So the second point I think I'd like to make is that ISS could be used for more for exploration. It could actually be used as a base camp for exploration. We had a leader that many of you probably know, Tommy Holloway, was our program manager for quite a few years, and right through the difficult part of our integration program. And Bill, I'm sure, will remember this, but Tommy used to show these charts. We would have these all-hands meetings, and he would show these mountain climbing charts where he would show climbers, and it was really a hang in there, we're going to get there, we can get there. And it was at the very end, he'd always say, I'll see you at the top. I don't know if you guys can remember that, but that was one of his ways of saying that ISS construction is really difficult, but if you hang in there, you'll get there. Well, exploration is going to be hard too. It's going to be very, very difficult. There's going to be setbacks along the way, and I believe that ISS could be used as a base camp, and it could be used as a base camp in many different ways. Analogs is one way. We've talked about that a little bit this morning, and I think there's going to be more discussion on that. There's a new program that's being set up called iStar, which you're going to hear more about, which is really the idea of using ISS as an analog platform. I think Koichi maybe brought it up this morning about how we will talk about time delays, and we can actually put in time delays to give more crew autonomy to simulate what a Mars comm delay would look like. That's the kind of thing that we can be doing in that kind of an analog program. But we can do more than that. We can test new systems. We can, and we need to do that, because as we go out into exploration, we have these new systems that they're going to be counted on to work for their mission, for the crew, and there's no going back, as we've talked about earlier. There's no spare parts coming. It's got to work. So we really need to exercise the systems thoroughly, and we can do that at ISS. So the third point that I'd like to make is it is possible that we could take a piece of ISS and we could take that small piece and put it in a high Earth orbit. Okay, so this is a different kind of use of ISS. It's taking the infrastructure of ISS, not try to move the whole thing or anything like that, but take a piece of it and put it at someplace like L1, where we can then use that as really a high camp. If you think of ISS as like a base camp, this would be like a high camp where you can use that as a base of operations for missions to the moon, missions to Mars, missions to asteroids. So I would like to see us pursue that kind of an idea further. I think that it has a lot of tremendous possibilities, and no matter what, I think we've got an exciting future ahead of us. So, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Rick?
Thanks. As you can see from the panelists, I'm not J.D. Polk. So when I saw my name up here, it was a little bit of a surprise. But I'm a bluff kind of guy, bottom line up front. I'm going to say some things that may or may not cost my job, but maybe not. I was a private practice, family practice, sports medicine doc, did pretty well, was actually really good at it, made a lot of money before I came to NASA. So if I end up going back there, I won't have lost very much. But, you know, over the last 4 years I've been coming to this, I've always been impressed with the interaction with the audience, and I'm going to throw some things out there and get some input and try to give you something to sink your teeth in. I'm a trench kind of guy. I deal with the astronauts, their medical problems, try to design treatment programs, get them back up there, and just give you some of my observations on things I think we need to fix to be able to answer Mr. Gerstenmaier's question. What do we need to be doing in the space life science research area on ISS to support exploration? I'm only going to talk about things that I know about. I'm the lead for musculoskeletal sports medicine and rehab at Johnson now, and I see a lot of astronauts with back pain, herniated discs. Smith had mentioned some data, some research that we did, that we published. It's a fairly big problem. We've had 44 post-flight disc herniations in astronauts. I've worked on another paper with Eric Kurtzman about in-flight back pain. We have 53% of astronauts described in-flight back pain. 10% describe it as excruciating. I've had crew members tell me, Rick, if there's nothing else you fix in space, fix my back pain. Because I get up there, after I get through with my space motion sickness, I got this back pain, and it's a real pain. So try to figure that out. And one thing that was very interesting when we started working on trying to figure out a research program for the herniated disc program, I had gotten a panel of neurosurgeons together back in 2009 to try to kind of figure out a good research program to do that. And they, when they heard our research, heard about our problem, heard about what happens in space, and some of the things we think about, which isn't really based on objective evidence, besides some work that Dr. Rajula did out in spine elongation, they said, you know, you guys at NASA have a really unique opportunity to look into something that affects probably just as many Americans as the common cold in terms of what a doc will see in their clinic. You have the opportunity to look at something that happens as a result of just your occupation. You get back pain in space. You cannot design a study on Earth, cause a problem, and then study. You can't do that. So go and do it. Get an answer to this question. And I'm working with the orthopedic surgeons down at Methodist Hospital in Houston, and they do a lot of proteomics work, looking at biomarkers for inflammation, different things. And I had a meeting with them this week, and I talked about this problem, and afterwards I felt really excited because I was thinking, you know, this is something we could actually start looking at, using proteomics, looking at a lot of different technology to try to define what the etiology of back pain is, and we can do it with your astronauts because they get that as part of their space flight. You can't, you don't have to induce that problem to see what happens. So anyway, I think that's fascinating because it trickles down to the private sector. And I always try to think about the research we do here in terms of how it's going to benefit other folks. So that's one area. If we can get an insight into the etiology of back pain, if we can understand what exactly happens at the level of the intervertebral disc, I mean, that's a win-win, and we should be pursuing things like that, and ISS can certainly be used for that. And if we don't take the next 10 years to be able to figure these problems out, we've wasted people's time and money, number one. Number two, bone loss. We've got 56 post-flight fractures in astronauts. We've been going back and forth for years about what's the line in the sand for whether or not space flight has caused this problem or not. We're getting QCT on board to really help us define the site architecture of bone to see if that's really an issue. But we have, over 50 million women in the United States that have osteoporosis and the issues associated with osteoporosis. We're all ramped up and excited about looking at bone, but I feel like we waste a lot of time in trying to get our research programs through the process to try to get the answers to this right now. You know, a lot of folks are really excited about bisphosphonates. I deal with the orthopedic surgeons that fix our astronauts' hips and other things, and they're saying, you know, in populations that get bisphosphonates, we see very, very unusual fractures we don't see in any other population. You got to think about things besides throwing pharmacologics at people to try to fix problems. Rick Schuring's opinion, not NASA or the Johnson Space Center's opinion, which gets back to exercise. One of the most challenging issues we dealt with in Constellation, I was Constellation doc along with Jeff Jones, was trying to get our exercise requirements on Orion. I know Jeff's here and he can relate at the hours we spent trying to get our requirement met on Orion. And a lot of the reasons that we really want to get that met was, aside from bone strength and muscle maintenance and stuff, was the crews like to exercise. They really like the time on the equipment. They like the feeling that they're, you know, that they're maintaining their body strength and stuff like that. And when I brought that up to the Orion engineers, they literally laughed at me and said, well, what's that? So I actually talked to Doug Hamilton, who helped me put it in engineering terms, and I said, you know what, if you can't guarantee 100% that you will not have a unassisted rescue, you have to protect for bone and muscle. And they looked at me and said, oh, okay, yeah, then you got your exercise equipment. I thought, okay, so physicians need to learn to think like engineers, and I'll tell you, I've been fighting this for years, but I think I have to admit this. I'm a better physician for having worked with the engineers at NASA because I think much differently, much more critically. So those two things, and then the last thing as far as things we can be doing right now to figure our problems out, EVA-related injuries. We're in the process of publishing a study on shoulder surgeries due to injuries related to the hut design, and it looks like the planar hut is definitely implicated in injuring shoulders resulting in surgery. We've had 24 shoulder surgeries in U.S. astronauts, 12 of which can be directly related, according to these astronauts I interviewed, to their time in the planar hut. Okay, so now I've got a group of astronauts, engineers, suit engineers, orthopedic surgeons, shoulder biomechanics working on how we would build a new spacesuit around the human, not to injure that shoulder. That's good work to do, but if we're going to do exploration, certainly planetary surface exploration, we're going to be spending a lot of time in the spacesuit. So we got to design a spacesuit that's not going to hurt our crew members, and that goes for everybody. I'm really curious at the Russian experience. From what I've heard anecdotally, Russians don't hurt their shoulders in Orion. Great. Why? Why is that? What's unique about that design, and how can we influence our design to not do that? We're not married to the hut. You know, we could do something different, but if we stick with the hut, we have certain constraints. So anyway, those are three important research areas. As you can tell, I'm passionate about what I do. I firmly believe mission drives innovation. And the exciting thing is when you take excited, passionate people who are smart, you throw a little bit of money at them, really great things come out of it. And you have to have a defined mission to do that. I throw back to the audience right now. In life sciences, do we know enough to go to Mars? I would say yes. I talked to my colleagues about that. If the administration said today, you know what, economically we cannot afford Moon and Mars, one or the other, you take your pick, from a life science perspective, could we do that? I throw it back to the audience. I feel we could. We know a lot of the issues we're dealing with. There are big questions, but given that hard problem to solve with the people in this room and other folks out there, could we do it? I'm absolutely confident we could do it. So I throw it back to you guys. I mean, what do you think? And if you feel that way, then let's press forward with the mission instead of putzing around. Okay. Like I said, you know, I'm an Army guy, so I use very simple words and short sentences. You know, one thing that I think is really underestimated is the fervor out there, the excitement for exploration. I teach a lot of school kids, and kids are really excited about exploration. And I can't get over how the fact that fact is misrepresented in the media today in terms of what direction people want this country to take in terms of its space program. So, you know, I talk to these kids. They love it. They want to be a part of it. Kids are raising their hands, want to be an astronaut. Surprisingly, nobody raises their hand to be a flight student, and I haven't figured that one out yet. So anyway, I think my time's up, but I threw some things out there that I think are concrete things that we could sink our teeth in, and if nothing else, we're going to have benefits in the ripple effect, and I really think that's how we should use ISS.
Thanks, Rick. Ulrich?
Yes, sir. So Rick is, of course, a tough act to follow on, I have to say. My name is Ulrich Straube, and I'm from the European Space Agency. I'm a flight surgeon. Most of you will not know me, and make sure that this stays like that because I want to come again. So my background is in clinical medicine, 10 years of hospital medicine, internal medicine, radiology, radiation protection. I'm a radiologist as well. I did flight surgery training with the Luftwaffe and at NASA 2 years, over now, then last, correct me, 10 years or so. Together with my NASA colleagues, I could participate and hopefully did medical support in 5 shuttle missions, and with my Russian colleagues, 3 Soyuz missions in Russia. So my mandate here, obviously, as I understand, is space medicine, future of ISS, and the European aspect to it. The last one is a tough one. So let's start with the space medicine and future of ISS. Flight surgeons have the job to enable and to support astronauts becoming and remaining happy, healthy, professional space flyers, astronauts and cosmonauts. That's what it is. Therefore, ISS needs healthy astronauts, and astronauts need a healthy ISS. It's as easy as that. So actually with this, you could say I'm done, but I'm not, because I've got 7 minutes. So why is that? Well, it sounds trivial, but it definitely is not. And here comes maybe the part which might be somehow counterproductive to my Groundhog Day next year, namely simply the fact that, for example, the loss of CRV seems to be so long ago that nobody even misses it. But I do. I definitely do. The in-flight support regime is something that we had to adapt, and that we did, to a certain extent, adapt to the current situation. However, you have to understand, everybody here interested in space medicine and mission support, having missions safely executed, crew time on orbit is strongly increasing. That's a good thing. Yeah. Crew time for MEDOPS is strongly decreasing. Yeah, well, if this is a good thing or a bad thing, I think that will show the future. However, at least many of my colleagues, including myself, will be very alert about that. The shuttle is gone, that's a fact. Soyuz was never intended to be a crew return vehicle for emergencies. That's another fact. It's a very reliable spacecraft, but I don't want to really have somebody with a running IV on Soyuz returning to the ground. So at least to me that rings a bell. Then we did thorough studies about ATV from the MEDOPS perspective, and we came to the conclusion it's not a real substitute for shuttle. For our needs, there was supposed to be a joke. So will cost me. So one of the distinguished panelists today stated already that the future of spaceflight, I guess he was referring to ISS because that's, again, my mandate, will not be determined by medical problems. Well, I hope, and I'm pretty certain that I'm in a good company with all of my medical colleagues, that we make sure that this stays like that. But I tell you what, I think it's real work. So the European aspect to it, well, first of all, we show up, we invade the place. So our presence will be there like at least every other year for long duration missions. Then we have a strategy. So we have ATV on the back, and we have Columbus in the front. So we have got the Russian part and the delivery. I'm sorry for the shuttle, but that's the biggest volume coming up there. So that's the one side, and the other side is we are, and we want to be USOS, United States Orbital Segment. So here we are, in the front at the end. And since we are prone to that, we try not to lose oversight. That's why we created Cupola, which allows us to look around. and I guess that's necessary. So seriously, of course, what do you expect if you invite a German, a European, a German, and a physician? Of course, you get concerns. And the good message may be we have a sort of a training and endurance in finding consensus among multilateral groups. So we wish to have, we really wish to have, at least that's my wish, to share a bit of the American genes concerning spontaneous enthusiasm, motivation, activation of big groups, organizing them and going forward to do something. I'm sure there you better do not put the Europeans in front. And as far as the Russian side goes, I admire them for their incredible wisdom and endurance in dealing with realities and still not giving up and going on and making things practically, non-neurotically, simply they make it, they get it done. So outreach,
I think we have to focus from the medical perspective on core demands, which is still, as easy as it sounds, the health and the well-being of the astronauts, but knowing that this definitely means something different today than it meant at the Apollo times, also referring back to what Walt in the beginning said about the Apollo area. You know what I mean. Thereby, I would like to turn around and also bring that forward with your help to the outside. What our demands for us are also defining our core competencies. It's namely the dealing with the ensemble. Well, that's it. Yeah, this is international cooperation. Thank you for the team effort. So it's exactly what you just said concerning microgravity, radiation protection, which is very important to me and should be to the audience, and telemedicine. These are the fields we really can gain something, to my mind, and we still have to. And it does not make sense to me that we try to compete with multi-center randomized studies with an N of over 1,000 like they are ground-based standard. We cannot do that. But we have a unique environment which, with a non-fakeable attributes like microgravity, and there was another one. I cannot read it anymore. So this is what we should focus on. And yeah, I could talk, and I would like to talk about HPP, but that's not my expertise. But there we do have demands. We have to get away from the still shots like selection, mission assignment, in-flight, post-flight, to en route, more following the metamorphosis for a variety of reasons, but I leave that up to the experts. And last but very important remark, actually I'm not supposed to sit here because I should work console STS-134. This is what actually brought me here, namely mission support for the ongoing mission. And I want to thank NASA and my colleagues Joe Dervey and Rick Center that they allowed me to be here and torture you.
Thank you, Ulrich. Igor?
Добрый день. Я Игорь Ушаков, директор.
Good afternoon. My name is Igor Ushakov. I'm the director of Institute of Biomedical Issues. I'm the person that already stood up there for 3 hours prior to lunch, but enjoyed it tremendously. Back when we were taking a step backwards in the history, trying to rewind back a couple of decades and then follow that path onwards within literally a few hours. And I really do feel, you know, after a good lunch, everybody's feeling like they've got some additional resources becoming available, and I couldn't really wrap my mind around that. And then Charlie Bolden, who's a big friend and advocate of space medicine, helped me understand what that was all about. And I want to thank Mr. Bolden for paying so much attention to our issues that are issues to be shared. There are common problems, and where we stand is that we've gathered here in order to set forth some recommendations as to how to do a robust job in defending human spaceflight, because you hear quite frequently that human spaceflight is quite a costly endeavor for a limited amount of people, cosmonauts, astronauts, and the return on the investment from the standpoint of scientific work that they get done there is insufficient. You know, you hear that kind of sentiment a lot. Internationally, it's something that crops up in newspapers and across the media, and we need to be able to come up with a solid way to answer that. And I'll tell you a little secret. Bill and I meet much more frequently in Moscow, at dockings, landings, Baikonur. And he always says to the crew, to the cosmonauts, especially when seeing them off, he always has the best words to say. At least he says, "Take care of the station," is what he says. Take care of the station is and taking care of. He says, you know, it really, you know, puts the nail, you know, puts the nail on the head. It's something that you say to a young hunter. he just learned how to shoot, and they tell him, take care of your surroundings, man. Because you can hit a bear, but you can also miss and hit the poor little rabbit, or God forbid, your co-hunter. So we ought to be taking care of the station. If we prove to be able to take care of the station, we'll be able to preserve the human spaceflight and the space medicine. Inessa is right when she says that we need some combined breakthrough projects. And to a certain degree, we need to acknowledge that space medicine is not necessarily in stagnation, but at a certain standstill for a while. And it's due to the fact that there are no major big projects currently. And basically what we're doing is we're going through the emotions, But yes, we are collecting a lot of statistics on muscular activity, on heart, on bone loss, and we need this because space medicine's only been around for 50 years, and terrestrial medicine's been around for 5,000 years. And we're basically going through all of these motions at a pace that's 100 times faster. It's highly technological, it's pretty looking, but we need to be thinking ahead. We need to be thinking about the future of space medicine, and it's only through major joint projects that's achievable. Modeling interplanetary flights based on the ISS is one of those possibilities. I know some cosmonauts, at least some Russians, that are ready and willing to fly for 500 days. And it's got to be right that the main factor at work will be not zero G necessarily, which ultimately gives a certain reason to believe that we'll be able to surpass that. Even the flight that continues for a year and a half or 2 years, or at least we'll be able to compensate that due to countermeasures, well thought through countermeasures that need to be perfected. But having said that, then there are the other factors: radiation, barrier, first and foremost, and psychophysiology. Radiation, hurdle, is unclear, is a challenge. It's one of the challenges that are called out in the bottom of our agenda. And the radiation limit is not something that's been defined yet, because physicists and astrophysicists have not been able to give us a definitive answer of the radiation environment that may occur to our crew. The range is quite broad, and radiologists have not been able to give us an exact forecast whether it's something the humans will be able to withstand. And so discussions are in order, and the ball is in the physicists' court. They need to give us more definitive parameters to work around. But radiation can be modeled in certain analogous projects, as they're called nowadays, analogous environment. And my colleagues will be commenting on that sometime later. Maybe I'll be able to shed some light on that later tonight when I talk about the second phase of the Mars 500 project. What I would like to conclude by saying is that we're approaching the brand new, the brave new medicine, the interplanetary space medicine. This will be a brand new chapter, a brand new type of medicine that needs to be based on the achievement of the biomedical revolution. That's exactly what's happening due to molecular and genetic achievements. And all the changes that's bringing with psychophysiological branch of medicine too, field of medicine that will be aiming to expand the cognitive capabilities of humans, the main 5 processes that are so priceless in space, as they are on Earth, but especially they come in handy up there: perception, attention, thinking, memory, and creative approaches, because a space flyer is a creator of something radically new, of something that's not been done by anyone prior to that. So let's follow that path together. Let's gear towards getting to the interplanetary space medicine, and let's get started with robust joint projects. If funding is a lack, for whatever reason, federal constraints, federal budgeting constraints, it could be achieved via commercial avenues of financing, but it's something that's inevitable and it's the path that we have to follow. And in conclusion, I would like to address this with Charlie Bolden, and I need to say that our joint working group, our joint Russian-US group for space medicines has been around for decades, and Chuck Berry, the first speaker today, already pointed that out beautifully. But for the longest time we've not been able to reapprove the new provisions that needs to be signed by the Russian Academy of Sciences and Roscosmos on the one side, and it's been the sticking point. But we're hoping that this pure formality will be able to fork over this year. It's not the most important thing, but at least it will lay the foundation for us to make sure that we can start talking those joint projects that we already have in our heads, on paper, in our hearts, which is critical as well, and the understanding that we see for the future of space medicine. Thank you.
Thank you, Igor. Next, Vadim.
I'm Vadim Gushin from IBMP. I'm a space psychologist, and since nothing was said from this point, let me share with you two issues. One came not only from ISS, but from the long study we made together with our distinguished Canadian colleagues, headed by Peter Sudfeld. And this study was devoted to the values in the astronaut corps. And according to the results I'm honored to declare now, and the statistics is considerable, we have 28 subjects. Some of them participated on ISS flights, some of them worked on Mir, and the result is these 50 years gave us a new culture, and this culture is represented by the system of values, and it's universal. It's not for the cosmonauts and only for astronauts or for taikonauts. It's universal. And the values are target orientation. This is the prime value of this culture. Second is social skills and proper social behavior. And this is clear because being confined for a long time and doing together very important operations under risky conditions require a special cohesion. And third, this is adventurous character of these people. So I think it's important to proclaim now that these 50 years gave us a new culture, and it's not related to religion or language or special territory, because we cannot call space territory. So I think this is a very important result, and it gives us some, let's say, some hopes that these people can create a new goal for the society, and this goal is supposed to be, I think, interplanetary mission. This is the first issue I want to speak. And the second issue is related to Mars 500, because today many speakers mentioned the time delay in communication and its importance. In Mars 500, for the first time, on the standardized conditions, we scientifically simulate this delay for already 300, almost 300 days. And even more, we tried so-called high autonomy, like on NEMO before. And high autonomy means no communication between the mission control and the crew. And let me tell you, this is a real problem. During landing period, the crew had to do telemedicine operation under this time delay. And we managed to see two types of behavior, and I'm not very optimistic about these two types. Let me explain what I mean. First type is that when the people do not receive feedback from mission control immediately, they became very nervous. They sent us many, many messages, repeating it one by one, and not trying to resolve the problem, completely relying on the opinion of mission control. And I don't think this is a good model of behavior for the future interplanetary crew. Second is even worse, as for me, because this part of the crew, they didn't even wait for any recommendations or requirements from mission control. They just take it as it is and try to do on their own and didn't take into consideration any recommendations. I think both is destructive behavior. Both is important to take into consideration if we think about interplanetary mission. Then a couple of words about complete information breakdown or high autonomy. In the previous studies on NEMO, it was said that's good for the crew, it's stimulating for the initiative, the self-disclosure, and probably that's true. In Mars 500, this situation also was regarded by some of the crew members as the opportunity to plan their work schedule, to do it in the way they want. But at the same time, this 1 week breakdown caused the further decrease of communication with mission control. And this is not good, because that means that the crew do not need us anymore. Far away from Earth, they do not need us, and they feel like that monks in the monastery who are not taking care of what's going downstairs in the village. And I think these two examples shows vividly that simulation of information delay, communication delay, and high autonomy is not that easy on ISS because it could be dangerous. It had to be prepared on Earth in analogs first. At the same time, if we will not try this in the interplanetary mission, you can find the crew who will behave like that pirates, who are not taking care about the queen who sent them to the mission. And from that point, I can conclude that ISS can be a test bed for the interplanetary studies. But we have to carefully prepare this kind of research, taking into consideration the needs of the crew. Under high autonomy, they will lose contact with families. Do not forget about that. At the same time, if, again, we just postpone this question, saying, oh, it's not so important, I think we will lose the nice opportunity to use ISS not as a train who is going nowhere, but as the train going to a station the whole mankind wants. And the interest to Mars 500 stresses that mankind, humanity, is interested in the interplanetary missions much more than in the orbital flights. So, believe it or not, but we have to prepare for the interplanetary flight. And if we just stuck on orbit, we are not on the moon and not on Earth. We're somewhere in between. And that's how we feel. And that's a little bit sad because Korolev, the constructor of space rockets, you heard his voice in today's documentary. He was thinking that the flight to Mars will occur in 2 or 3 years. And that was the end of the 60s. And now we think it will be in 30 years. So you can easily think where we are now. Korolev was closer to the target than we are. And we cannot concentrate and regroup our efforts without the big goal. This is the psychological paradigm we cannot deny. Without the big goal, any society breaks. We need that big goal or we'll stuck. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Bob?
I'm Bob Thirsk with the Canadian Space Agency. I had the opportunity.
Bob, you better sit. No.
I had the opportunity to fly a long-duration mission a couple of years ago, and I probably wouldn't have said it before then, but I'll say it now that I think the best thing about the space station program is that it's international. And the reason why I say that is the same reasons that Bill mentioned in his opening remarks, and that is that the space environment is harsh. It's difficult to do operations in space. And there's so many interfaces on the space station, power and video and electrical and thermal and everything. It's really admirable that 16 nations, 5 space agencies, numerous subcontractors can put this thing together and operate it. You know, they often say that the best thing for an astronaut to do when they have free time on board the station is to look out the window, and that's good. That's a lot of fun. But equal to that, at least for our crew, was simply getting together for each of the meals and just shooting the breeze and talking about how the day went. And the conversations, if you're a fly on the wall, would be really interesting because they always had this global perspective. You know, I would share how the Canadian parliamentary system worked, and Frank would talk about the European Commission, which I still don't understand. And Gennady would talk about the oil industry in Russia, and there always sort of this global perspective on what was going on. We'd also talk about how ops had gone on the day, and we would talk about how payload ops had gone. We'd admire the people on the ground that would integrate all this science together, such that a payload would have 5 different co-investigators from 5 different countries, and payloads would share hardware from numerous countries, all coming together, tightly integrated for one purpose. That would really impress us. And then, you know, if you were a fly on the wall in a bar in Canada, late at night, at an all-Canadian table, you would probably hear us talking about Russia, United States, Japan, and Europe in a disparaging way because each of these countries bother us or annoy us once in a while. For a variety of reasons, Arctic sovereignty, human rights, trade imbalances, things like that. But you know, building this space station together as a partnership of 5 brings us all together. And the space station and international space efforts are an oasis of sanity in this crazy, frustrating world that we live in. So I'm a strong advocate of international space station program. We're talking about the future as well. And yeah, I think the space station should be used as a test bed for what we do in the future and perhaps the next space exploration endeavor by humans. Someone this morning said that the biggest obstacle to human spaceflight is political. And that's probably right. You know, we're using the space station as a test bed for technical reasons. We want to develop better, more reliable regen eclipse systems. We want to develop better rockets that will make space exploration in the future better. For countermeasures, medical countermeasures as well, but perhaps we should start thinking about the political aspects of things as well. You know, we had the MOU that brought all these partners together, written in 1993. And I enjoyed Inessa's and Mike's comments about the model of cooperation. I'm not as negative as Inessa. I'm not as positive as Mike. Being a good Canadian, I'm halfway in between. And my feeling is that there are some good aspects of the model of cooperation for the space station that we should adopt for the next space exploration endeavor. But there's some problems as well. The world reality is different today. You know, Russia has got a better economy. The U.S. is losing some influence in the world. We live in a world with terrorism, environmental concerns. We're coming slowly out of a recession right now. If we were to write a new MOU today for the ISS program, it would be different. And I think we have to look at the world condition today and start thinking about what the next space exploration endeavor is and write a new basis of cooperation. But it should be based on internationalism, and it should be based on a partnership. Canada is the smallest partner in the space station program, 2.3% partner. We do not own a rack on board the station. But because we're a partner, we have access to wonderful resources in the US, in the European, and in the Japanese laboratories. And we can do anything we want. We have an ambitious research program that meets the needs of our scientists back home. So whatever we do with the station, whatever we do in the next step in space exploration, should be international and based on a partnership.
Thank you. I think we got a little bit of time for some questions here. Yeah, we can make Brewster talk. Are you supposed to talk, Brewster? No, you're not supposed to talk. Wait, you're on my list. George is telling me you're supposed to talk. You have anything you want to say? No? Okay, all right. So Brewster will ask a first question. You have the first question, Brewster? Anybody got any questions? Anybody? Yep, up here. Walt? All right. Go ahead, Walt.
You know me, I've always got a question. I missed some of the first couple of presenters here on this particular panel, but I listened to the last of them, and I find when they start talking about isolation or not isolation, communications or not communications, international or not international, I find a less than objective view being taken about them. Most recent, the last one was international program, and talking about all the good things about international programs and trying to get rid of the politics. Actually, without the politics, there probably would not be international programs. The reason being that it's so much less efficient in running a program than if it was 5 different people having their own program. But it's very expensive. Can't afford to do that. That's what's caused people to go to international programs. You need to take a look at the pluses and minuses. I can assure you there are many, many negative aspects of the international programs that have to be weighed, offset the positives that you get out of it. I didn't hear anything in this panel saying they were doing that. Secondly, somebody was talking about the travel and going to Mars and whether to the ground contact or not ground contact. Let me tell you, back in the 1960s, at least in the early 60s when I flew, we had 4% coverage, ground coverage. And that intruded on us many times. We had to quit doing what we were going to do because we had AOS coming up. The next generations, you've gotten to the point where you've got 100% coverage, essentially, on everything. and the ground, undoubtedly, loves that. You need to take a look at some of the fundamentals about whether the ground is in charge of everything and up there in the spacecraft, they're just trying to make sure it goes right. The ground would like to have all that kind of control and coverage. On the other hand, on the spacecraft, they're doing things incessantly, and I can understand. I've not been in that position on a space station, but I can understand when you don't get an answer back. If the ground is supporting the air, and in the air you're busy all the time, you expect an answer if it's a supportive answer coming back quickly. What I'm getting at is, please take a look at pluses and minuses and not just try to sell a program. What has happened is politics has gotten involved in almost every aspect of what's going on in space now, and a lot of other things, but it's what's going on in space. Start going back to try to come up with objective answers. If there's a reason to bring in somebody else, or to bring in another country, or to bring in another scientist, and that offsets the negatives of it, do it. But don't just fool yourself and act like it's all great. End of speech.
All right. So let's see if there's any comments on his points here. What do you see as the positives and negatives of the politics? Who wants to?
I got a quick comment on.
Yep.
So we had an astronaut office meeting and pulled all the new astronauts, all the astronauts in there, talked about how we're going to use maybe ISS to emulate Mars trip, and they're all talking about, can we turn the phone off and turn the internet off and maybe put communications off part of the time. And it was a big discussion. I sat and listened to this, and I waited a little while, and then I go, well, you know, on Mir, we only had a communication every couple orbits for about 8 minutes, some of the time, and when the power was out, we didn't have it for 3 days, a bunch of times. And so you get into this expectation, and you had it, Walt, on Apollo and all, so you get into this expectation of calm, and you sure know how to ruin a good space flight. If everyone knows you can call, they expect you to call. And we got to beat ourselves back because we use it all, and this phone's going and the internet's going and can't even be up in space.
May I comment? First of all, let me say that in the 60s, the flight duration cannot be compared with the contemporary flight duration. If my daughter is not talking to me today, that's not a big deal. But if she is not talking to me for 2 months, it's a serious family problem. That's the first thing. Second thing, when I miss my wife and can't contact her for 2 months, it's a pain. If my boss cannot reach me for 2 months, it's a holiday. Well, let us not be so simple discussing communication. There is a position of mission control who wants to control every move. And they feel comfortable when they know what is going on, like parents supervising their child working somewhere. But the crew wants to be independent. The crew is a big piece of professionalism. And of course, they want to make decisions on their own. And of course, interplanetary crew will be adventurous, powerful, and independent. At the same time, imagine there is a crucial situation and there is no crew surgeon, as there are no crew surgeons now aboard, and they need immediate recommendation and they can't get it. So, it's one thing, then you're flying and without any serious problems. You do not need that supervising. It's a social pressure. But when you need immediate response and you can't get it, this is bad. So, again, we must not take it so simple and easy and compare incomparable issues. This problem is really a problem, and we're trying to deal with it for several years. And it's a big group in Russia. Now it's a group in Hungary, in France, and hopefully in Britain. And again, let me say that communication breakdown and delay is not only the problem for the space crews. Now, if you feel that your computer is not responding, you're trying to press all the buttons. And I see these crazy people trying to get the immediate access to the data. We now we are in such a culture here on Earth that we require immediately to get response. And the more complicated the task is, the more information access I need. And how can we see this interplanetary mission as an easy one and predictive? I don't want to leave this crew face to face to something that they do not expect. And again, it's incomparable, the flight of the early 60s and nowadays flight, and of course the interplanetary mission.
Poor Columbus and Lewis and Clark, they didn't have all this.
Again,
Yes,
I think
they are poor.
If
and
we step back,
too.
what we're really all talking about is we ought to look at these, as Walt said, as objective measures. There's a plus and there's a minus of each one of these. Any of these things to one extreme can become a problem to you. And I think we're seeing it even in our society today, right? We're all wired with BlackBerries, cell phones. Our bosses, right, you want an immediate response, immediate answer. I type a message to my employees. I expect an answer back now. If I don't get an answer back, what's wrong with them? Are they sick? What's happening? And we've gotten this where we're no longer able to do some autonomous things, and I think it may be going to an extreme where we no longer have the ability to think, be creative, be innovative. We can't reflect, we can't talk anymore. We're just in this immediate react world, and that's not a good place to be. So I think Walt's point is we need to be careful that we don't generalize based on where we are, where we sit in our society, where we sit in our culture, and we step back and we look at this as an objective way to go measure and talk about these things as pluses and minuses and what the advantages and disadvantages are of each one. Another question somewhere?
I have a question.
Yep, sure.
And Rick brought back some bitter memories of early ISS days when you used to call me into your office when I was ISS MedOps lead and make me justify things. And you would say, now, why again do I need to fly another one of these IRAD cans? And it was back to your predecessor actually started, Tommy. He would do the same thing, call us in and make us justify. Now why do we need to have 24/7-hour BMEs? What are they going to do in that back room? Watch the paint dry? I mean, that's the kind of question, the mentality they had. And little did he know what kind of nightmares the MedOps hardware was going to be on orbit in terms of repair and logistics. But I think that what you're saying today is that the legacy of this International Space Station is going to be the international cooperation in one of the greatest engineering feats of our lifetime, obviously. But the second legacy ought to be, as David mentioned, the discoveries that happened on the station. And right now we have some big obstacles, and they're programmatic in many ways. And they're also a problem. We can't, these scientists cannot learn how to play nicely and get along, as Nessa pointed out. So we're going to have to kind of force it, somehow from the programmatic level to get an international cooperation, to get some quality science on this station. So the discoveries that Dave talked about are what come out of the station. So my question to you is, how are we going to do that?
Okay. Panel, how are we going to do that? Who wants to? I think if I boil down his question is how do we get, we talk about doing research, right, and doing exploration kind of activities, engineering, others. How are we really going to do that with Space Station? How do we actually mechanize, or how do we have a chance of getting this kind of research that could be game-changing and then make someone that's not in this room, that's not a space fanatic or a space
you have to have an innovative environment. You know that.
Yep.
And everyone knows what an innovative environment has, and it's inherently opposite to the kind of bureaucracy that spaceships deal with. So we have to all work toward moving it toward those innovative principles.
Okay. Yep, Oliver?
And obviously, again, taking advantage of the unique environment. So exactly what makes a difference. We have a spectrum there of radiation, ionizing radiation, which we cannot mimic in that complexity on Earth. So let's take advantage of that. It's an environmental reality we have to cope with on the one side. On the other side, it may allow us to invent and develop opportunities that we could not mimic on Earth. So it's just that we have to focus on that rather than developing more and more formalisms than we ever had before. As a matter of fact, it is now for me much more difficult and more wasting to get a blood draw done on ISS and some reliable data out of the blood count than it was years ago. So this is something which I only partially can understand and accept. Yeah, and I do know that we have good developments concerning radiation monitoring, but I feel that, and also of course radiation protection, but there is a lot to do in that direction, and we do certainly need other means of telemedicine, and we should be the one who are the pacemaker there and make it possible and in the end cheaper and more available for every ground-based application. And this is what we really should focus on, rather than having a super perfect set of paperwork which allows us in the end to do nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, Rick, 1 minute.
May I ask a related question?
Sure.
It's right on this topic. This morning, we heard twice that to date we aren't able to do more than 35 hours of actual research per week, even with a crew of 6. So as one of many researchers here in the room, I would really like to hear if this panel has any specific response to why we aren't able to move beyond 35 hours of research a week, because all the great international collaboration we might generate are to naught if we can't get more than one person's 40-hour week of science done on the space station.
Mike?
I kind of brought this up, so I'll add a little bit more. I said earlier that the team is working really hard to try to get more hours allocated, and we just recently, as I said, we went through the scrub. Interestingly, I'll bring this up for the medical community, MedOps is currently not considered utilization. So I think this got brought up by one of our panelists. So it's not counted in the a lot of the things that are done by the MedOps community for working with the crew doesn't go into that rack up. But be that as it may, everybody's being squeezed, including MedOps and PAO, and everybody who has allocation of crew time is being squeezed. And that's what's going to happen. I can tell you for the maintenance community, all the things that have to happen for housekeeping, that has basically been cut in half of what we had as an allocation. We don't know for sure that it's going to work, but we're going to try it and see if it does work. but we have to continue to do that kind of thing. And then the last thing I would say is the shuttle itself, when we get the shuttle there, you have to understand that what's going on right now and today with the crew that's delivering with the current program, basically all of the crew time that's during docked ops is in transferring things and working, getting things out of the cargo bay or out of the mid deck and into the station stowed away. So that whole block of time while we have docked ops is basically just taken right out of the timeline. You could just take that and say there's zero utilization, boom, it's out of the timeline. I think we're going to see a significant bump up after the last orbiter flight, as we don't have that volume. That's one of the beauties of the orbiter. It can bring us a whole bunch of stuff, but we have to stop and deal with it when it's there. We're not going to have that. That's a two-edged sword. We're not going to have that luxury anymore. Things are going to come in little pieces, we hope.
And I think, as collectively as a group, we're really working on trying to increase the amount of research time, but we are picky about the way we define research time. So medical exams, those things, they don't count in the research bucket. Exercise time, even though some of that data can be used potentially as other information, is not counted in the research bucket. And then we spend, what Mike's pulling on a little bit here is, as we go away from the shuttle, we're going to have, this year, we'll have 17 vehicles docked to space station this calendar year. So you've got 17 logistics vehicles coming up. There's a significant amount of crew time preparing for that vehicle arrival, offloading the cargo, as Mike described, putting it some other place and going back again. So when we lost a large vehicle, which could bring essentially 8 flights worth of stuff up, which was the shuttle, but more importantly, it brought a crew of 6 or 7 with it to actually carry the cargo off and install it. We're going to be in a different regime. So we've got challenges in front of us on how we go do that. I clearly agree with Dave. We also need to get away from the structured research, and we got to get into the serendipity, somebody said, serendipitous research, where the astronaut can actually be creative and look at some of these investigations. And if they see something that's different, they actually have time and free time to go explore a different avenue that wasn't on the checklist and wasn't in the procedure. And that's where potentially some real breakthroughs can come.
They'll never be in the procedures.
Yep. Okay, another question somewhere?
Just to step back to the question of political difficulties, our politicians' views are shaped by public opinion. So, what does the panel think can be done to actually enhance public opinion so that the public want more space and want more research, and they're actually telling our politicians to do more?
It's an interesting question because when we had the Apollo astronauts come back a couple of years ago, we kind of talked about some of those things in our spare time, and I remember Al Bean said that one of the most valuable things that could have been done to reach out just to the average folks on the street was Al Shepard hitting that golf ball on Apollo 14, that we need to do more stuff like that, play basketball on the moon, do stuff that kind of common folks would just sit there. And of course the argument always comes back, well, that's ridiculous to think about spending that kind of money to do stuff like that, but that's what appeals to folks, things that just, are kind of things that they can relate to necessarily. And just get creative in that way. I don't know. I just thought that was a very interesting, insight. And a lot of the Apollo guys kind of concurred with that. Looking back on it, if they could do things differently, they would try to do more things that just appealed to kind of average folks. It's kind of interesting.
Any other comments or thoughts from anybody on that? Another thing we're doing, which is pretty good, is we're doing some participatory kind of things with kids. We have some spiders that were flown up on this shuttle flight, and it turns out that the kids in their schools, they all have a little spider habitat, so they can actually watch the spiders on orbit spin their web, and they can compare that to their actual spider in their classroom. We do another thing we did with 5th graders, where we told them what equipment was on board space station, and they had to develop a science project based on that. This was 5th and 6th graders. One of the projects was one of the kids had an eraser and a tape measure, and they pull it back and it hits the eraser and it goes wong wong on the ground. And then we had Wheelock do it on orbit, exactly the same experiment with the same equipment on orbit, and his goes in a nice cylindrical orbit. And then she's now explaining, this is a 7th grader, explaining what she saw in space compared to what she saw on the ground. We did another thing where the kids wanted to take a rubber tube, one of those bungees we used to stretch with, and they charged it up, and then they put a water droplet around it, and it turns out in space it actually orbits the little rubber tube. That was a brand new kind of thing that even some of our guys are thinking about. Now, what does that really mean? I mean, it's a cute little experiment, but here was a 5th grader in a school in New York that actually came up with this stuff. So we are actually actively soliciting experiments from kids in the 4th through 6th grade to go fly and be done on space station. Now, you can say, are those worthwhile or not? But I guarantee you in those classrooms where they have done this, we may have spurred some student into taking a career in science and math out of this activity. And what's a dollar value or what's that worth? I don't know, but it's an interesting way. But how can we do more things where the average person is participating in what we're doing? They're just not a passive observer. They're seeing some aspect of it occur. And that's a clear way to reach out and get people excited. Julie?
Yeah, I'm Julie Robinson. I'm the ISS program scientist, and I had 2 points I wanted to add to the discussion. The first is I just wanted to make the facts clear on the 35 hours a week that Mike first brought up today, because when we talk about crew time, there's sort of the narrow definition, as Bill mentioned, that we use. And that narrow definition is schedulable time, and the 35 applies only to the U.S. operating segment. So there's really twice that much crew time for research, and that's only the schedulable time. To put that into terms that you might understand in your own work, it's like if we only counted you as working when you were actively meeting with someone in your office, and that time was constrained. So we don't count the time that the crew's thinking about experiments, the time that they're learning about experiments, the time that they're planning their day, the time that they're exercising and collecting data on the side, all of those things. So it's not as shocking as that number may sometimes appear. Even so, it's a real challenge to drive back all of the operations and maintenance tasks and really get the time that we need. So it's our most active program risk for utilization, is something we're working really hard on. Shifting gears a little bit, I wanted to share with you what I think is one of the most important changes that's happened in the way we do research on the space station, and it's important from the point of view of innovation. So early in space station, we really suffered from a hangover from the Space Lab way of doing things. The Space Lab way of doing things was that you over-planned. You spent 2 years, 3 years planning every second of time, optimizing every experiment, because you were going to have to cram 60, 70 experiments into an 8, 9, 10-day period. And so in order to do that, you orchestrated everything, you redefined every single second of time, and every experiment that was in that suite was completely limited. If anything went wrong, they were done. If anything went right, didn't matter, they were done, because they only had a certain allotment of time. What we're doing on the space station now is, instead of defining the experiments exactly, we're defining sets of opportunities. It started as an innovation for our national lab users, but it's spreading to our NASA life and physical sciences users as well. Human Research Program now has extra subjects that they plan in case they find observations along the way. And what this means is every researcher that collects data and finds something surprising that they need to follow through on already has the opportunity built in to do the follow-on investigation without waiting to come back around. That's how a real laboratory functions, and that's something we've only been able to do now because we have a space station 24/7. Thanks.
Okay, up in the corner, back there, or here, okay.
Thank the panel for enriching us in terms of what the space station might do. Station is really the only vehicle for human space flight in the foreseeable future. And I had the sense, listening, that we had a lot of discussion of the things that were necessary but not sufficient to make a compelling case for the future of human space flight. And I was wondering if there is anything any of the panel members might wish to add to what they've already said to help make the compelling case to go beyond space station.
Well, that's of course a huge endeavor to answer to something like that. But what crosses my mind is that I think we could do much better in motivating to the people the capabilities we have in reference to environmental monitoring, and trying to bring it, what may sound pretty easy, but bringing it to the people that there are capabilities in looking, for example, for a disastrous wave, looking for an oil spill, looking for a forest fire, looking for pollution. It is really
to my mind, not science fiction, take it good or take it bad. It is not science fiction if we would think that human spaceflight might once be really essential in helping us to survive on that planet. That is might be, of course, these shoes are much too big for me, but what I want to convey is we can and we should do a better job in turning out all these positive sides that this technology, and particularly the fact that humans drive this technology and master this technology, may help us in getting a much better global understanding. And that is something what the people, I think, under global understanding, not a few of the people would think that it is something scary and iffy. And if we can convince them that these technologies are also and first of all used to the benefit of the entire inhabitants of this planet, then together with a good school education and a certain transparency, of course also taking in account the varieties and the cross-cultural differences between different countries. So certainly it would take a different set of things to motivate a German than to motivate I don't know, an American or you name it. But if we take these things into account, and if we take these really obvious capabilities concerning environmental monitoring and understanding the nature of our planet and the future of our planet, I think, I mean, why the hell should that not?
There's a simpler way to say that. This country demands that we are a first-rate spacefaring country and will take nothing less, and that means a lot. And that comes out in a lot of ways.
Yes, go ahead.
Chiaki Mukai from JAXA. To maximize the utilization of the International Space Station for science, I think the crew involvement is essential. That is a statement. And then last year, I did the same, pointed out the same situation, but I still strongly believe that since we have 6 crew members and the ISS operation becomes close to the maturity status, so that we can continue the operation for next 10 years or something like that. So how about to split the crew into the payload, the system operators and the science operator? 3-3 is good, but if you can, 2 science operators, and then we can change the scheme of the operation in the International Space Station as well as the training. Because if the people who have the science background are assigned to the science operators, then the training is much easier, and then the reduced time, and then the operation will be also good. So that's why I think that
payload
or operation
model of
versus some maintenance operator or system operator. And it's the time to specialize the role of the crew.
Well, I think there's certainly an argument to be made for that, going back to, like David said, the payload specialist type of arrangement. But it concerns me a little bit for an operation like Space Station because, you do need, I think, every member of the crew trained to be at least cognizant or able to function with the systems and troubleshoot and do malfunctions in case, other crew members who you might call their, who are the ones that are trained to operate the vehicle are, stuck in another module during some critical event. I think there's merit in that, but I'd have to think about it a little more.
I don't think crew tasking works perfect for that. I mean, between ARM, EVA, and you start adding it up, what you have to do to cover, you can't get purely there, but that may be a direction.
All right, I think we'll do maybe 2 more questions. So.
Larry Young of MIT. First of all, a quick comment on Rick's point about folks and what they're interested in, and whether it's more than golf and eating M&Ms. Don't underestimate folks. Every voter was a 5th grader. Every congressman was a 7th grader. And I think all of us who go around and speak in public about our common interests find a tremendous well of interest in things in space. Yesterday's New York Times front story was about these Jupiter-sized free planets. People are really, really interested in the science, and we shouldn't underestimate them. If we do show them nothing but M&Ms, that's all they're going to think we're producing. But I wanted to return to the comment that Chiaki and Judy were making about optimizing the science that returns. And yes, space station is not space lab. We have more time. We can repeat experiments. We can do a little bit of what Dave Wolf referred to as revisiting experiments. But I think we've also lost something, and that's what Chiaki is referring to, and that is the heavy involvement of the crew as members of the experiment team during their training period. Those of us who were Space Lab investigators remember having the crew in our laboratories, having them contribute to the protocols, having them invested in the experiment, and finally have them be authors on the papers. And boy, they're our best friends. So thank you to all the crew here who were our best friends.
Yeah, those are good words.
May I
Larry.
tell about this? I think that I just want to say how right is your last statement about the involvement of crew in the experiment, because I think that the most when we look into what was done on Mir station and on the other Russian station, the best results, the most interesting and in quality and quantity results were obtained where these experiments were done by Dr. Polyakov on station. He made more than 1,000 experiments, and he did them, and all of them were done just like this, and because he participated in every experiment, not like operator doing something. He was interested, and from this point of view, I just want to talk about this because I think that it requires more time on the pre-flight time. We have to be not just come and familiarize them, just to make them believe that experiment is interesting. To become a member of the company, of the scientific crew, they have to be involved, really involved. And this is very important. We talked today about the future. I'm quite sure, and I agree completely with Larry, that our experiments on board lost a lot because our cosmonauts, they're good people and they're doing their best, but they're doing just like operators without, putting too much drive and too much head in it. That is extremely important, Larry, for successful scientific work on board.
Bill, okay. Just follow up on one thing Larry brought up real quick, because I've been faced with this question a lot, as I'm sure most of you are, who on a day-by-day basis try to defend our space program. We're created to explore, period. It's our DNA. Why do we put our tail between our legs and hide behind that fact? All the spin-offs and everything else you can talk about that are benefits to mankind, we can talk about that, but you can always invariably find someone to shoot that down. But we're created to explore, and let that go, and just stand proud behind that, and let it speak for itself. I'm tired of fighting people on why we should have a space program and divert money to this, that, and the other. If we stop exploring, I don't know what happens, but when you talk to kids and you get kids going on it, they're curious, they want that, and you see that excitement. Somewhere along the line, adults lost it. I don't know. So maybe that's our job, to re-stimulate that through what we do. But we got to be bold in that and stop hiding behind it.
Okay, and the last question, and then...
The last point I want to make is not a question. Every year I come, and every year you have these, what sounds like a nihilistic session. There's no science, it's the end of the world, and that... there is good science being done on station. Our astronauts giving their time of studies. There are highly successful studies underway. Are there as many as we'd like? No. Do we need to do a lot more? Yes. Is international cooperation critical? Yes. Why? You're no longer competing with each other. Look around. Look at budgets and look at television. In America, space program competes with baseball or football or or some other big agenda item. You need to bond together and do the best science in spaceflight because there is limited money, and your competition isn't Russia versus the United States anymore. It's the space programs of the free world and all peoples against all the other things happening on Earth. So my advice would be find a way to work together, find a way to increase astronaut time to work with scientists, hold scientists to a hard, high standard so you don't waste a dime on bad science or unproductive science.
All right. So that's a great conclusion, and what that was a challenge to every one of us in this room, right? Because we like to get together and then quibble about our own little pieces and talk about the little things that we like to talk about. But we need to take that higher value that he called us to, look at what we're doing, ignore those little small pieces, get excited about the exploration things, show that exciting vision of the future, and we need to do that widely to a large group of folks and recapture that imagination of what we can do. I mean, when you look at this picture up here on this screen, who can imagine that this thing as big as a football field is put together? I can remember how many meetings I have been in when I was told we could never build this thing that is on this picture. Even George questioned me in several meetings. And George told me that if we got to the airlock, he would be happy and he would continue to pay my salary for another week. And then when we got beyond the airlock, George goes, crap, you might actually build this thing. Keep going. And somehow this team put this thing together. Now we got to talk about it in those same unashamed terms. Don't talk about the 2%, 1% that isn't there. Talk about the miracle that's up there. Push the research where we can. Get excited about exploration. Think like a kid. Think like a fifth grader. Get back and get that basic excitement back and share it with folks. And we'll keep exploring and we'll be somewhere in 2021 instead of in this room talking about how we can do cooperation and do other things. So your challenge is reach out, talk to others, and we'll see where we are in the future. Thanks.